Greetings, fellow readers. This is Rambling Collector, and we are back with Reading Reflections, Episode 4. And for this particular video, I thought it would be fun to talk about The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. And the main reason for this is because the newest book of the series, Murtagh, is on its way later this year. So what better time to talk about this classic high fantasy series than right now? With that being said, let's get started. So first of all, in my personal opinion, The Inheritance Cycle stands out as a classic high fantasy series for both old and young readers alike, with a little bit of everything to satisfy all our readers. This series, for instance, dives heavily into dragon lore, including magic, lifespans, and even their history with the elves and humanity and how the dragon riders began. Not only that, but for me, the ironic part of this is, I started the Inheritance Cycle way after watching the Aragon movie, right? That was the only exposure I'd had to this series for the longest time. And then at one point, back when I was in elementary school, I saw the book Brissinger sitting on the shelf, and I was curious, because I'm like, there's no way this is related to Aragon, right? Turns out I was completely wrong, and from there, it was a journey, not even gonna lie, because after reading the prologue and finding out that there was far more to the story than I had ever realized, I dove into Brissinger like a man dying of thirst seeing an oasis. Needless to say, I was very much blown away by just the sheer scope of the world that was being built. But then after that, I read it backwards from Brissinger to Eldest to Aragon, before then diving back in and starting it all from the beginning. Aragon, Eldest, Brissinger, Inheritance, and that was all we knew for a while until the new one. The Fork, the Serpent, and the Witch. That is the newest book, until Murtagh comes out later this year. But I thoroughly enjoy this series, and it's been one of the few that I've actually read twice through that I can remember. But more than that, besides the main characters, one of the things that I definitely enjoyed about this series was that it kept Galbatorix, our main antagonist, as a mysterious and terrifying presence until near the very end of the series, similar to Sauron from Lord of the Rings, because for the longest time, Galbatorix was essentially kept as a main mystery. He was the one responsible for taking out the riders of old, and who was the main threat to Aragon and Saphira, our main two characters, with Aragon and Saphira being the first pair of rider and dragon to be seen in quite a long time, ever since Galbatorix had nearly killed all of them. But because of this, they decided to keep Galbatorix as a very mysterious presence. Like, he would always be there, lurking around in the background, with things such as at one point how they narrowly were able to dodge Galbatorix arriving in Drasleona, the second to most well-known city of Allegasia. And to be honest with you, they just narrowly missed him by a very slim chance. But because of this, anytime Galbatorix was mentioned or popped up, or we learned more about his backstory, it always added more mystique to the character, until we finally saw him in Book 4 of Inheritance. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, when the author, Christopher Paolini, is expressing what Galbatorix looks like at that moment, I kind of expected something a bit more demonic, but to see him as like this middle-aged man, wrapped up in artifacts of old, with things such as a dragon skin cape, the sword of the original leader of the Dragon Riders, as well as the crown of an ancient king, you know that this is not a man to cross. You know that he has seen and done a lot in his lifetime. And the fact that he has survived so long unchallenged tells you even more so. Anyways, enough gushing about Galbatorix, but In my personal opinion, the best parts of this series, besides the amazing combat and battle scenes, which, by the way, those were spectacularly well done, with areas such as fighting on an open plain to horrors unimaginable of sieges, defending small towns, all the way to assaulting massive cities and even fighting under a mountain. There was a lot of great combat scenes in here, both with armies facing each other as well as singular combat with duels. Pardon me. But also dragon versus dragon, which I will explain here in a bit. But more than that, though, the greatest aspect of the story was the world building, from various cultures to the world of Alagasia itself. There are multiple times throughout the series of the books that we get these explanations of various cultures of elves, dwarves, humans, all of that, and even dragons themselves, all of which are expanded upon to help you to further understand the different peoples that live in this great land. And Alagasia itself was described as a land of wild beauty, with vast deserts, open plains, massive forests, and mountain ranges. It was a beautiful country, and I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, I could almost see myself there back when I was reading it. It was so well done with the descriptive world building. I could almost picture seeing this vast and beautiful land stretched out before me, whether it was over the skies or even just visualizing it through the character's eyes. I could visually see it in my mind, and in my opinion, that is a great way to keep your audience invested, helping them to imagine the world that they are diving into. But that's enough of my overall thoughts. Let's keep going, shall we? Next, my favorite books of the entire series thus far. Those would have to be Book 2, Eldest, and Book 3, Brisingr. I'd be quite honest with you guys, something I noticed with the book series themselves is that two of the biggest ones are the second and fourth ones. But Eldest, most definitely, has to be the biggest of the bunch. Because while Inheritance was the way to end it, Eldest had to keep it going from Aragon. Like, if you look back at Aragon, you will see that it is a much smaller size than any of the other books that follow it. But Eldest is the one that really helps you to understand the scope of the world that we are looking at, taking us to various different places such as Dewweld and Varden, the forest home of the elves, all the way from Farthendur, the land of the dwarves. But we also even visit another country with Surda, a country of land that had separated itself from the main land of Alagasia many years ago as a way to defy Galbatorix and create a free land for humans. But Eldest by far had a lot to accomplish. It had to introduce us more to the worlds of magic, introduce us to the elves, and even help us to learn more about the ancient language, which is definitely something that is expressed more throughout the series as it goes on. And I gotta tell you guys, every time I've read something in the ancient language, whether it was a spell being cast, or even just people talking towards each other, I always felt mystified by it. I don't know, there was just something enticing and incredible about the ancient language being used, whether vocally or through spells, that always had this sense of beauty and mysticism to it, which I guess rings well with the name of it being, of course, the ancient language. But regardless, Eldest did a fantastic job of introducing us more to Aragon, finding a surviving old rider with Oramus and his dragon Glader, and Glader is actually pictured right here in Brisingr. But more than that, we see not only the rise of a new rider in regards to the light, introducing an old rider into the light, but we even see a new dragon rider for the dark, serving Galbatorix, with Murtagh, Aragon's revealed half-brother, and his new dragon Thorn, shown here on the front cover of the second book. But with Eldest, we saw explorations of more magic, romance between Aragon as well as him recovering from old wounds that were inflicted upon him in the previous book, with Durza leaving a lasting scar that afflicted Aragon for a wide variety of the book, I want to say. My apologies, I almost said series. But, regardless of that, eventually Aragon becomes healed and even becomes upgraded as a way to fight Galbatorix, becoming a human-elf hybrid, which that alone really helped to change him up a lot and give Aragon a lot of great character development. We see him struggling with things such as pain, romance, all of which is explored through his character. But more than that, the other main reasons why I enjoy Eldest and Brissinger so much is because it introduces me to another one of my favorite characters, Roran. One of the biggest highlights I can say throughout this whole series is that it keeps things fresh by constantly shifting us between different points of view, ranging from Aragon and Saphira themselves, even having Saphira by herself a couple of times, but also we see characters such as Nasuada, the leader of the Varden, and how she struggles with things of leadership, trying to keep the army together through sheer force of will and morale. But more than that, we also see other characters such as Roran, Aragon's cousin, and Roran by far became one of my favorite characters alone because of his sheer determination of being a simple man surrounded by all these incredible characters using magic, ancient swords, dragons of all things. And he goes in there with a simple hammer and starts swinging, first to defend his home, and then to protect his people against Galbatorix's forces, leading them through the mountains of the Spine all the way to the city of Tyrm, and finally having them reunite with the Varden near the end of Book 2. Like I said, there was a lot that was introduced in Eldest, and it was a very chunky read, but I thoroughly enjoyed it through every second. Every page of it was amazing. But the reason for Brissinger is because this book alone is what got me started on the Inheritance cycle to begin with. This is what sparked my love for this series the most. Brissinger is far, let me think of the word here. It has a lot more exposition dumping over time. I'm not even going to lie to you guys there. There is a lot of exposition that goes into this one, as well as info dumping. But the reason why it does this is to continue the story, to provide us information about dragons, as well as introduce us more to the lands of the dwarves, their politics, as well as providing more of a journey in a way for various reasons. Brissinger alone has one of the biggest traveling vibes, I'd want to say, ever since the first book. The second book is more focused on the adventures of Aragon, Roran, and Nasuada, helping them all to come to that coalescing point, where they all meet up again. Brissinger is something similar. However, it starts off first with a tale of rescue and vengeance, where Aragon and Roran go after the bane of their existence, the Razak, the ones who started it all, Galbatorix's elite assassins for dragon hunting and other such investigations. They invade the Razak's home of Helgride, deep into Imperial territory, next to the second largest city, Draciona. From there, after defeating the Razak, the gang splits up, with Roran and Katrina riding back to the Varden's camp on Saphira, while Aragon goes on alone, because he finds the traitor of Carvajal, Sloan, after telling Sloan to go to duel in Varden, sending him on his way. Aragon continues his way back to the Varden on foot, with Arya herself, the elf girl, or one of the other main characters of this series, going after him, traversing from the Varden camp all the way out into the wilderness just to find him. From there, we see Aragon and Arya growing closer together over the time that they spend together. And I gotta say, the whole interactions between them of how, at first, we know it's going to be awkward since Aragon did confess that he feels attraction towards Arya within Book 2. So for them to just simply grow past that awkwardness and just grow closer together, not as a couple, but as allies, and just learn more about each other, that alone was very interesting to see. It helped to build that neat little character chemistry. Sort of a will they or won't they type of situation. But then after that, it introduces us to one of the most grisly things that Paolini has ever done. Soldiers without pain. Imagine for a moment, if you will, a living man charging at you. You cut off his arm, or you slice him open, you think, this man is dead. But then, 5 seconds later, when you're fighting another soldier, that same man you just cut open, or took off the arm of, is getting back up, swinging at you, missing arm and all, and is just laughing away the pain that you continue to inflict on it. Now imagine, if I may, this same human being continuously coming back after you score critical hit after critical hit, again and again and again, to the point that they are barely human, and this thing is still living. It is still coming at you. No matter how much you hack and slash at it, it is still coming at you. Yeah, not gonna lie. When I first read that part, it terrified me when I was envisioning it. And it is something that is introduced to us throughout Book 3. The idea of soldiers that are enchanted to no longer feel pain, and so they will keep getting up and fighting, no matter what critical or terrifying wounds they take, they will continue to fight. But, in my opinion, this definitely had a lot of great adventures for both Aragon and Roran, with Aragon, of course, going on this hiking trip back to the Varden, but after that, heading over to Farthen Dor to see the crowning of a new dwarf king, hoping that it is his new foster brother, Artemis, who adopted him into the dwarven clan that he is a member of, and hoping to score Artemis the chance to be a king, dealing with things such as politics, assassinations, things like that. And while this part was a little bit boring at times, it was still very interesting to learn more about orc culture in a way. Learning, in fact, that there is a dwarven clan called Asweldenrakan, if I'm remembering that correctly, that has a personal vendetta against dragons and dragon riders in general. Primarily for the fact that Galbatorix and the 13 Forsworn who served him, they all practically annihilated this dwarf clan years ago, and since then, the dwarves have always veiled themselves in a form of grief, and have held a personal vendetta against dragons and dragon riders for ever since. After that, we see Roran himself growing as a character, actually getting married in this book to his childhood sweetheart, Katrina. Then after that, we see him fighting against soldiers without pain, wrestling an Urgle despite being whipped for disobedience. All of this one I feel has definitely the most epic vibes to it, which don't even get me started on inheritance, but this one was definitely a good preemptor to what was to come. Anyways, I think I've talked on this segment long enough. Let's keep going. So, favorite characters. And the reason why I don't have any official pictures of them is because there's not any official art that I can use for them. And because I don't want to get in trouble for using, like, characters from the movie. Anyways, my favorite characters throughout this whole entire story were, besides Aragon, of course, being one of them. He was, of course, the main character that you follow, and he has the greatest character development. But even so, watching him grow as a character, from a young farm boy to a rider of legend, slaying shades, people who are possessed by spirits, all the way to even dueling against Galbatorix himself. Watching Aragon grow as a person and as a dragon rider throughout this entire series was amazing to behold. And even though it does have a bittersweet ending, with him having to depart the lands that he was born in, simply to make sure that the dragons and riders can be safe once again, I do feel like watching his journey come to that conclusive end was satisfying in a way, even though it was bittersweet to see. But then, the second character that really snuck up on me with how epic he is Roran. And the reason for the hammer will be explained here in a moment. So Roran is Aragon's cousin, so of course he's already going to have that famous family vibe to him. But because of this, He is just a regular man standing up to defend his home of Carvajal at first, from the Razak and invading soldiers, but then after having to watch his home be destroyed, he continues to grow as a leader for his people, leading them through the mountains of the Spine to the city of Tirm, leading them across the waters towards where the Varden are camped around the burning plains and helping them assist in a fight when they were losing in. But Roran, over the course of this, he gains the moniker of Stronghammer. And I gotta say, watching a regular man going up against magicians of all sorts, even enemy riders or enemy generals of all sorts, wrestling an Urgle to the ground despite being whipped for disobedience, fighting against hordes of enemies alone, even at one point standing upon a miniature mountain of corpses. Yeah, Roran is a straight up badass, and I love watching his character grow. Hell, a lot of the times, I found myself cheering for this guy, wondering just what he's going to accomplish next. And at times, you have to remind yourself that he is a regular human. Even despite the fact that he gets magical shielding from Aragon at times. Despite all of this, this guy continues to get back up, swinging his hammer and saying, "I didn't hear no bell." Taking down multiple soldiers at once, even fighting against soldiers who could not feel pain, wrestling in Urgle, retaking a city, all of that Roran does over the course of the 3 books that we see him in. So he has earned the title of Stronghammer, as well as freaking badass in my opinion. Aragon alone goes through a lot throughout the entire book series, having to leave behind his home, learning the true identity of his father, as well as coming to terms with the fact that he is related, in part, to one of the greatest dragon riders, the founder of the Resistance, Brom, the founder of the Varden, the Bane of the Forsworn, all of that. He has a father of legend that he never knew until the 3rd book. And even then, the surprise of it was amazing to behold. But even more than that, watching Aragon grow to accept his own identity in Book 4, which I will explain here in a bit, watching that alone, him coming to terms with his own identity and his own being, was wholesome in a way. So I understand that this series is a young adult series, but watching him grow as a character, watching as the series seemingly gets darker and darker, leading towards its climax, but focusing more on things such as identity, learning to accept who you are as a person. That alone was a really fulfilling quest to see. And I was all on board for it, guys. Because Aragon goes through some horrifying stuff. At one point, being imprisoned under the catacombs of Dracylionum when they are trying to invade the city. Having these morbidly horrifying priests who are missing body parts in service to the Razak, being forced to watch as the bane of his existence, the ones that he has hated the most, essentially being born right in front of him and having to watch his closest friend Arya pulling her hand through a manacle to the point that she skins this thing nearly to the bone. That alone was terrifying and absolutely shocking to behold. And him having to watch that, being unable to do much. That was hard to read. I'm not even gonna lie, guys. That was really hard to read. But yeah. So both of these characters go through a lot throughout the series, but yet they come out on top every single time. And I was left always cheering for these two, wondering how they're going to overcome their next obstacle. Okay, I think I've gushed enough. Let's keep moving on. So, random thoughts here. Besides the world building here, one of the biggest things I enjoyed the most about this series was the scope of the ancient language itself, as well as the exploring of post-world history, like post-war, I should say, because there are still scars where the dragon riders were gone. We see their ancient marks throughout history. seeing this world be so impacted, this singular land, was incredible. And even that, at one point, when we have Aragon and Saphira gliding towards the ancient island of Vrongard, the ancient home of the riders, when we see that, at one point, they get caught into a wind so terrifying that they are literally riding on the updrafts and they see the horizon. And learning from this, they learn that the world itself is in fact round, not flat. The world does not revolve around Allegasia. The world is bigger than they ever thought it would be. And just seeing them come to terms with that in reality, their entire war that they've been fighting is over what is essentially a small country, and learning that beyond that there is a vast world that still remains to be explored, that was both humbling as well as incredible to behold. But more than that, one of the things I really enjoyed the most was the concept of true names. As in, who you are as a person described in the ancient language. And one of the things I love about the ancient language is that you cannot lie in the ancient language. The ancient language is the language of truth as well as magic, meaning that it is incredibly binding, and if you mess up, you risk losing your magic forever, or it backfiring on you horribly. So the fact that you cannot lie to yourself in the ancient language, you cannot lie about who you are, and knowing your true name gives you power over yourself, but learning the true name of others can give you power over them. And sharing a true name, even more so, is one of the most personal and greatest honors you can give someone. Just that concept alone of true names is fascinating to me. But the other thing that comes in Book 3 and is introduced is the idea of the Eldonari, or the Heart of Hearts. Essentially a stone that grows inside of a dragon and is the container for their souls long after their physical bodies have died. And the older a dragon becomes, the bigger this thing becomes, to the point that it's like a large jewel, but it contains their very beings within. That concept alone, when it was introduced in Book 3, it blew my mind, imagining a great and mighty beast as a dragon being reduced to that of a large gem containing its very soul and essence. I couldn't wrap my head around it for a time. You're telling me that this great and mighty beast of legend is now contained within this gem, and that shattering it would destroy them forever. But learning to interact with them, you gain access to a wealth of knowledge and magical power that can easily be one of the greatest treasures you can ever receive. Like, I love the vibes, I love the themes here of family, honor, identity, the journey, all of which is explored throughout this entire series, and it keeps blowing me away every time, which is why I cannot wait to see what Book 5 is going to do. How can you wrap up, how can you continue a story that was already wrapped up, in my opinion, perfectly in Book 4? Was it bittersweet? Yes. But the fact that we were able to finally return to this series, I am thoroughly excited to see what's going to come next. What dangling plot threads are going to be addressed, or even if, possibly, we might see the return of another ancient evil. We never know. But, after all is said and done, though, the biggest question I have now is, what's next? What will be next for this series? I'm not entirely sure. But another way to interpret this question is, what will be next in Reading Reflections? To be honest with you guys, I'm not entirely sure. To be honest with you, a while back I did do something like a voting system in a way, where you all could pick whichever series I was going for next. Unfortunately, that did not do too well. But I do have some ideas about some series that I want to talk about next for this series, because I feel like it has been far too long since I've done Reading Reflections. And to be honest with you guys, it is a series that I want to keep going. It is a series that I want to expand upon, because these videos by far are going to be my largest, besides my narrations, of course. Because this is essentially me just reflecting on older series, or even newer ones, that I've read through, and just want to reflect on what my experiences were with reading them, favorite characters, things like that. For now, I've got a couple of ideas, but for now, you'll just have to wait and see what comes next. But regardless though, guys, if you've stuck around to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. And if you're excited to see more of what comes from this crazy man's ramblings, I will leave a link to my playlist for reading reflections if you want to see some of the other popular series that I've talked about for this series, or if you want to see some of the other book rambles that I've done in the past, I will leave a link to that playlist as well. Once again, you guys, thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot, and I'm glad I could finally dive again into the world of Alagasia with all of you. Let me know your all's thoughts on this series alone. What were your thoughts if you have read Eragon before, or even if you just experienced the movie? What was your thoughts on it overall? Let me know. I'm curious to see what you all have to say. Once again, you guys, thank you so much for listening. This is Rambling Collector, signing off for now. Have a great day, fellow readers.